Randy Boissonnault is the Alberta Liberal MP and member of the Justice Committee. Michael Cooper is the Conservative Deputy Justice Critic, and Murray Rankin is the NDP's Justice Critic. Hi to all three of you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Vashi.
I appreciate it. Nice to see you again, I should say. Mr. Boissonnault, I'll start with you.
Sure.
Mr. Warnick today, in his testimony, I just want to read part of how he describes a conversation with Jody Wilson-Raybould that occurred on December 19th. He says, "I conveyed to her that a lot of her colleagues and the Prime Minister were quite anxious about what they were hearing and reading in the business press about the future of the company," referring there to SNC Lavalin. Do you understand how it is possible that Ms. Wilson-Raybould could have interpreted that as pressure, since it was after she had decided not to intervene in the SNC Lavalin case?
Well, I think there are two things I would say to that. One, I'm looking forward to hearing from Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould next week, and so I will wait to hear from her. It's her take on what happened that matters. Also, it's very clear that, as Mr. Warnick said, that the law and the legislation provides for conversations to take place on active cases, even once the public prosecutor has decided that a case should go to trial. So that's completely appropriate, and those conversations can take place.
The only thing I would say there is that, according to Mr. Warnick, Ms. Wilson-Raybould had already advised the Prime Minister that a deferred prosecution agreement was, quote, not a good course on September 17th. So then why did he bring it up again, and can that not be seen to be applying pressure?
I'm not going to make any inferences. That's a question that Ms. Wilson-Raybould can address when she comes to the committee next week.
Do you have any questions about the timing of that, though?
I don't have any questions about the timing of that. I have questions about issues related to where the story began. And as Mr. Warnick said today, it was factually incorrect. It was erroneous and, in some cases, defamatory. I think that was very important for us to understand as committee members today.
Is someone from the government going to sue the Globe and Mail, then?
Vashi, there's nothing that I said that would indicate that the government of Canada would take that course of action. I said that Mr. Warnick said some things that were very important for us to hear that caught my attention.
Mr. Cooper, Mr. Warnick did say that the Globe and Mail's allegations of the article were not correct, and he did call some of the claims defamatory. Does that put this to bed?
No, I think that, quite frankly, based upon the testimony of Mr. Warnick, it confirms and sheds new light on the pressure, inappropriate and potentially illegal pressure that was placed on Jody Wilson-Raybould. And I think it's important to go through the timeline. On September 17th, then Attorney General Wilson-Raybould told the Prime Minister unequivocally that she would not overturn the decision of the Director of Public Prosecutions not to enter into a deferred prosecution agreement with SNC Lavalin. Following that, we know that the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, his top political advisor, Gerald Butts, met with Jody Wilson-Raybould on December 5th to discuss what? The SNC Lavalin prosecution. We then know that there was a meeting on December 19th between the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Prime Minister and PMO officials to discuss what? The prosecution of SNC Lavalin. Following that, the Clerk of the Privy Council took it upon himself to pick up the phone and relay concerns to Jody Wilson-Raybould.
But how do you know that that equates to pressure?
Well, if that isn't pressure, I don't know what it is. And I'll take the words of Jody Wilson-Raybould herself, who said, apparently is reported to have said in Cabinet yesterday, that she felt undue pressure. And, of course, we know that she ultimately resigned from Cabinet. But it's interesting timing between when Mr. Warnick picked up the phone after meeting with the Prime Minister on December 19th, the Prime Minister fired Jody Wilson-Raybould as Attorney General at the next opportunity. I don't think that's a coincidence. Mr.
Rankin, what do you make of the timeline, and do you infer the same thing, that just because of the timeline it could amount to pressure, despite the fact that Mr. Warnick is pretty unequivocal about his intention not being to apply pressure?
He kept telling us that she didn't feel any pressure. You know, I know that. Well, of course, he couldn't know what she was feeling, nor could he know.
Well, he said no undue pressure was applied.
That's what he said, but he wasn't there when probably other officials in the PMO spoke with her. After literally dozens of times, SNC Lavalin lobbied those officials. They're not even being invited to our committee to tell their side of the story, which is interesting. Facts are, Ms. Wilson-Raybould resigned, and talked when she resigned about her role, the important role of being independent as the Attorney General. Fact, Mr. Butts, the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, resigned as well, and in his letter referenced Ms. Wilson-Raybould. Like, come on, I think reasonable people can infer from the timeline that Mr. Cooper has just recounted that there may well have been pressure. And one thing is clear, she felt that pressure. And Mr. Wernick can't tell us what she felt or should have felt. She clearly felt that pressure, and she's no longer our Attorney General. And here's the problem. The government's making a lot out of the fact that she's going to come and testify. But when the new Attorney General spoke today at the committee, he wouldn't say that she's going to be able to have the ability to actually tell us anything, because maybe she's got solicitor-client privilege concerns. Maybe she's got cabinet confidentiality concerns. So what good does it do to have her come and not tell her truth, which she said to Canadians yesterday in the House of Commons she so wants to do?
Yeah, Mr. Boissonnault, after what you heard today, and I listened to the testimony as well, are you assured that you'll actually get any of the answers that you had said previously you're hoping to get from Jody Wilson-Raybould?
Absolutely. If you listen to Mr. Wernick's testimony today, he stated very clearly that he was quite confident that the solicitor-client privilege did not apply to a great amount of what Ms. Wilson-Raybould might want to share with us at committee. And she's being advised by former Supreme Court Justice Thomas Cromwell. And we don't yet know what's going to happen. The Prime Minister's asked Minister Lametti to take a look at this issue, and that's important. And I think if we're going to talk about facts, let's talk about facts. Ms. Wilson-Raybould was shuffled from the Attorney General's role into the role of Veterans Affairs. That was very clear in Mr. Wernick's testimony today. The stepping down of Minister Bryson at the time, led to the Prime Minister needing to do three things: have a new Treasury Board president, to have somebody represent Nova Scotia, and to make sure that there would be gender parity in cabinet. So those are the facts.
So then why did Jody Wilson-Raybould post that blog post after that talked about
we can ask Ms. Wilson-Raybould that, but we cannot say that she was fired. She was not fired.
No, I'm not saying that.
My colleagues did.
Okay. Let's use the right word. She was removed by the Prime Minister as our Attorney General.
Okay, just back to my original question, though, Mr. Boissonnault, because I want to be clear. Do you agree, then, with the interpretation of Mr. Wernick that privilege doesn't apply here? Because Minister Lametti did not give the same impression.
Look, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm looking forward to what Ms. Wilson-Raybould will be able to share with us at committee when she comes next week. I listened to the testimony very attentively today, and as Minister Lametti said, the issue of client solicitor privilege is a complex area of law that is layered, and so he and his officials are taking a very close examination of this matter.
Well,
Mr. Cooper wants to jump in.
Yeah, I do want to jump in. I mean, first of all, we got almost nothing out of Minister Lametti other than to say this is all so very complicated, but he couldn't even tell us who could waive that privilege. We know at the end of the day it's the Prime Minister who can waive that privilege. And with respect to whether or not solicitor-client privilege applies, cabinet confidentiality, litigation privilege, etc., the bottom line is Jody Wilson-Raybould apparently seems to think it does, because yesterday she rose on a point of order and she said, I want to speak my truth. And she further went on to indicate that she's unable to do so. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's all but said that, and noted that the decision to waive privilege was not hers to make. I take the words of Jody Wilson-Raybould seriously, but she's going to be inhibited from saying what she wants to say, to speak her truth fully at our committee, and that's a real problem. And with respect to the approach that the Liberals have taken on committee, which is to say we'll hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould even if she's muzzled, even if she has one arm tied behind her back, and then we'll get to Gerald Butts, then we can decide whether to hear from anyone in the PMO. Well, after we now learn from Mr. Wernick that there was this meeting on December 19th,
totally
with
legitimate
top
meeting, Michael.
PMO officials,
Totally
and then
appropriate.
a discussion with Wilson-Raybould from Wernick, I think it speaks to the need to hear from Mr. Butts even more.
And a couple weeks later, she's gone from cabinet.
Yeah.
Fired.
Mr. Rankin, final question to you, though, because at the end of the day, and I know that there's a lot of politics involved in this, but Mr. Wernick did give a very voracious defense of his position. I imagine that if Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould, if Ms. Wilson-Raybould is able to do the same, she will do the same. At the end of the day, if it is, a version of events, if it is an intention not to put pressure, or Mr. Wernick doesn't believe any pressure was applied, and Ms. Wilson-Raybould felt that it was. How do Canadians ever get to the bottom of what actually happened?
Well, first of all, we have to have an open mind on this, and I certainly do. I want to hear what actually happened. The issue of whether there's political interference or even attempted political interference with the independent role that an Attorney General must play in our democracy is crucially important. I want to hear from the people you've just mentioned. I want to make sure that one hand isn't tied behind the back, as my friend just said, so we can get to the truth. Canadians Canadians deserve to know. This is crucially important.
Okay, I thank all three of you for your time this afternoon. Thanks to Randy Boissonnault, Michael Cooper, and Murray Rankin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister